In just 42 seconds, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses went from smiling guest to furious victim of a brutal on-air attack. What started as friendly conversation exploded into a screaming match that had the entire studio gasping, security rushing to the stage, and Sandra Bullock storming off set while cameras were still rolling. Joy Behar crossed a line that nobody saw coming, and what happened next left the audience in complete shock. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals. Hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss what we uncover next. Last night's episode of The View was supposed to be a celebration. Sandra Bullock was there to talk about her latest film project, her charity work, and maybe share some funny stories from set. The audience was packed with fans who had waited hours to see her. The energy in the studio was electric as the show began, and Sandra walked out to thunderous applause, waving and smiling at everyone. She looked gorgeous in a navy blue dress, her hair pulled back elegantly, completely ready for what she thought would be a fun conversation. Joy Behar greeted her with a big hug, and they sat down together. The other co-hosts were smiling, asking Sandra about her new movie, and everything seemed perfectly normal. Sandra talked about working with her co-stars, shared a hilarious story about a stunt that went wrong, and the audience was eating it up. People were laughing, clapping, and Sandra seemed completely comfortable. She was relaxed, leaning back in her chair, gesturing with her hands as she told her stories. But then something shifted. You could feel it in the air. Joy's smile became a little tighter, a little more forced. While Sandra was talking about her production company and the types of stories she wanted to tell, Joy suddenly interrupted her mid-sentence. "That's all very nice, Sandra," Joy said, her tone changing completely. "But let's talk about something real for a second. Let's talk about your personal life." Sandra's smile faltered just slightly. "Okay," she said carefully, glancing at the other hosts who suddenly looked uncomfortable. Joy leaned forward, and there was this look in her eyes that the audience recognized immediately. It was her confrontational look, the one she got when she was about to go after someone. "You've been very quiet about your relationships lately," Joy said. "Very private. Some might say you're hiding something." The audience went silent. This wasn't the fun, light-hearted interview they had expected. Sandra shifted in her seat, clearly caught off guard. "I've always been private about my personal life, Joy. That's not new. I think everyone deserves to have some parts of their life that aren't public." Sure, Joy said, waving her hand dismissively. "But you're a public figure. You make millions of dollars because people love you and support you. Don't you think you owe them some honesty?" Sandra's expression hardened. "I am honest. I talk about my work. I talk about causes I care about. I share what I'm comfortable sharing. That doesn't mean I need to put my entire life on display." Joy laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. It was sharp and mocking. "Come on, Sandra. You can't have it both ways. You can't take the fame and the money and then act like you're too good to let people into your life." The other co-hosts were exchanging nervous glances now. One of them tried to jump in and change the subject, but Joy shot her a look that made her stop mid-sentence. This was Joy's segment now, and she wasn't done. Sandra took a deep breath, clearly trying to stay calm. "I don't think I'm too good for anything, Joy. I just believe in boundaries. I think that's healthy." "Boundaries," Joy repeated, almost sneering. "That's a nice word for secrets. What are you hiding, Sandra? What don't you want people to know?" The audience was completely stunned. Some people were looking at each other with their mouths open, not believing what they were hearing. Sandra's face had gone from confused to angry, and you could see her jaw clenching. "I'm not hiding anything," Sandra said, her voice getting firmer, "and I don't appreciate the implication that I am. I came here to talk about my film and my work, not to be interrogated about my private life." Joy sat back in her chair, crossing her arms. "See, this is what I'm talking about. The defensiveness. If there's nothing to hide, why get so defensive?" "I'm not being defensive," Sandra shot back. "I'm standing up for myself because you're being incredibly disrespectful right now." The tension in the room was suffocating. Camera operators were zooming in, capturing every expression, every moment of this car crash happening in real time. The audience didn't know whether to gasp or applaud Sandra for standing her ground. Joy's face was getting red now. She didn't like being challenged, especially not on her own show. Disrespectful? I'm asking you questions that millions of people want to know the answers to. That's my job. Your job is to interview guests, not to attack them, Sandra said, her voice rising. There's a difference between asking questions and making accusations. One of the other hosts tried again to intervene. Maybe we should talk about Sandra's charity work, she suggested weakly. I heard you've been doing amazing things with... No, Joy interrupted sharply. We're having a real conversation here for once. I'm tired of these softball interviews where everyone just kisses up to celebrities. Sandra came on this show, and I'm going to ask her real questions. Sandra stood up slightly in her chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Real questions would be fine, Joy. But you're not asking questions. You're making accusations and putting words in my mouth. You're twisting everything I say. I'm not twisting anything, Joy said, her voice getting louder. I'm just not letting you dodge the truth like you do in every other interview. The truth? Sandra's voice was sharp now, cutting through the studio. What truth are you even talking about? You haven't asked me a single specific question. You're just throwing out vague insinuations and trying to make me look bad. Joy leaned forward aggressively. Fine. You want specific? Let's talk about the people you've cut out of your life. Let's talk about the friends and colleagues who've said you've changed, that you're not who you used to be. Let's talk about the rumors that you're difficult to work with. The audience actually gasped out loud at that. This had crossed from uncomfortable to outright hostile. Sandra's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Excuse me? Sandra said, her voice dangerously quiet. What rumors? What people? You're literally making things up right now. I'm not making anything up, Joy insisted. These are things people in the industry talk about. I'm just brave enough to say them to your face. Sandra stood up fully now, and you could see she was shaking with anger. You're not brave, Joy. You're a bully. You invited me here under false pretenses so you could ambush me on live television. That's not brave. That's cowardly and pathetic. The studio erupted. Some audience members were gasping. Some were starting to clap for Sandra, and Joy's face turned absolutely furious. She shot up from her seat too, pointing her finger at Sandra. Don't you dare call me a bully, Joy shouted. I've been doing this for decades. I've interviewed hundreds of celebrities, and I don't let them get away with their bullshit. That's not bullying. That's journalism. Journalism? Sandra laughed bitterly. This isn't journalism, Joy. This is a hit job. You have no facts, no sources, no real questions. You're just attacking me for ratings. The other hosts were standing now too, trying to calm things down. But it was too late. This confrontation had taken on a life of its own, and both women were too angry to stop. Joy's voice reached a new level of volume. You think you're so perfect, don't you? America's sweetheart. Well, let me tell you something, Sandra. People are tired of the act. They're tired of the fake humility and the rehearsed answers. They want to see the real you. This is the real me, Sandra yelled back, and the whole studio could hear the emotion in her voice now. Standing here, defending myself against baseless accusations from someone who clearly has a personal problem with me that has nothing to do with journalism or asking real questions. I don't have a personal problem with you, Joy said, but her tone betrayed her. There was venom in every word. I have a problem with celebrities who think they're above accountability. Accountability for what? Sandra demanded. You still haven't said what I've actually done wrong. You're just throwing out accusations and insults and calling it an interview. Joy stepped out from behind the table now, moving closer to Sandra. A producer off camera was making frantic hand gestures, trying to signal them to stop, but neither woman was paying attention. You want to know what you've done wrong? Joy said. You've made a career out of playing the victim. Poor Sandra, always hurt by men, always betrayed, always the innocent one. But maybe, just maybe, you're the common denominator in all your failed relationships. Maybe the problem isn't everyone else. Maybe it's you. The audience let out a collective sound of shock and horror. That was a line nobody expected Joy to cross. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of pure rage. How dare you, Sandra said, her voice shaking. How dare you bring up my personal pain and throw it in my face like it's nothing? You don't know anything about my life or what I've been through. I know what everyone knows, Joy shot back. And everyone knows you love playing the victim. That was it. That was the breaking point. Sandra ripped off her microphone and threw it on the table with such force that it made a loud bang that echoed through the studio. "I'm done," Sandra said. "I'm not going to stand here and be disrespected like this. This is disgusting." Joy actually smirked. "Oh, here we go. Can't handle the heat, so you're running away. How predictable." Sandra turned to look at Joy with such intensity that several audience members later said they had never seen someone look so angry. "I'm not running away from anything, Joy. I'm walking away from someone who clearly has serious issues and is using her platform to be cruel and vicious for no reason. The heat I can handle just fine. What I won't handle is being treated like garbage by someone who should know better." Joy's face was twisted with anger now. "Get out then. If you can't handle a real interview, get off my show." "Gladly," Sandra said. "I wouldn't stay here for another second if you paid me." She turned to the audience, and her expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry you all came here expecting a nice conversation. You deserve better than this. And I'm sorry I can't give you what you came for, but I will not be disrespected like this by anyone." The audience started applauding. First a few people, then more and more until most of the studio was clapping for Sandra. This only made Joy angrier. "Oh, please," Joy said loudly over the applause. "Stop with the saint act. You're not a victim here. You're a spoiled celebrity who can't handle being asked tough questions." Sandra was already walking toward the exit, but she stopped and turned back one more time. "You didn't ask me a single tough question, Joy. You just insulted me repeatedly and made up lies about my life. There's a difference. And somewhere deep down, I think you know that. I think you know exactly what you did here, and I think you'll regret it." "I won't regret anything," Joy shouted after her. "I regret inviting someone who's so fragile they can't handle a simple conversation." Sandra shook her head and kept walking. The cameras followed her as she headed toward the exit. You could see her taking deep breaths, trying to hold it together. Stage crew members stepped aside as she passed, and a few of them looked sympathetic, like they felt bad about what had just happened. Joy was still standing there, breathing heavily, her face bright red. The other hosts were trying to talk to her, trying to get her to sit down, but she was too worked up. She was gesturing wildly, still yelling about how Sandra couldn't handle real questions, how celebrities always want special treatment. The audience was in chaos. Some people were still clapping for Sandra. Some were booing Joy. Some were just sitting in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. Security guards were moving through the aisles, probably worried that the situation might escalate further. Sandra reached the backstage area, and the cameras caught one final shot of her before she disappeared. She looked exhausted and hurt, but also resolved. She had stood up for herself. She had called out the bullying, and she had walked away with her dignity intact. Back on the stage, Joy was trying to regain control of the show, but it was clear she had lost the room. The other hosts looked uncomfortable and upset. One of them was visibly shaking. The audience was still murmuring and whispering, the energy completely chaotic. "Well," Joy said, trying to sound casual but failing completely, "I guess Sandra couldn't handle having an honest conversation. That's fine. We don't need people on this show who can't handle the truth." But nobody was buying it. The audience knew what they had seen. They had watched Joy attack a guest for no clear reason, make personal insults, bring up painful parts of Sandra's past, and then act like she was the victim when Sandra defended herself. Even Joy's most loyal fans in the audience looked uncomfortable. One brave audience member actually yelled out, "That was wrong, Joy!" and several others voiced their agreement. Joy tried to ignore it, shuffling papers on her desk, but her hands were shaking. The producers were clearly scrambling. You could see people running around backstage through the gaps in the set. They had to go to commercial immediately. This couldn't continue. The show was imploding in real time. "We're going to take a quick break," one of the other hosts announced, her voice unsteady. "We'll be right back." As soon as they cut to commercial, the full reality of what had happened hit everyone. The studio audience was buzzing with conversation. People were pulling out their phones, already posting about what they had witnessed. This was going to be everywhere within minutes. Meanwhile, Sandra was in her dressing room, gathering her things. A production assistant knocked timidly on the door, asking if she was okay, if she needed anything. Sandra thanked her politely but said she just wanted to leave. She grabbed her bag, checked that she had everything, and headed for the exit. As she walked through the hallways of the studio, crew members stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. Some of them nodded sympathetically. One woman, a makeup artist, quietly said, "You handled that with class." Sandra gave her a small, sad smile and kept walking. She pushed through the stage door and out into the bright daylight. Her car was waiting. Her security team was there, looking concerned, asking if she was all right. Sandra nodded, not trusting herself to speak yet. She got into the car, closed the door, and finally let out the breath she had been holding. Back inside the studio, Joy was arguing with the producers during the commercial break. She was insisting she had done nothing wrong, that Sandra was being oversensitive, that this was all being blown out of proportion. But even as she said it, you could see doubt creeping into her expression. The other hosts were barely looking at her. The audience was still restless and angry. When the show came back from commercial, Joy tried to continue like nothing had happened, but it was impossible. The energy was completely dead. They limped through the rest of the episode, but everyone knew this would be the only thing anyone remembered or talked about. Sandra's car pulled away from the studio, driving off into the city. She stared out the window, still processing what had just happened. She had gone to The View thinking she would have a fun, friendly interview. Instead, she had been ambushed, insulted, and attacked on live television by someone she had thought was at least professional, if not friendly. Her phone was already blowing up with messages from her team, from friends, from people who had seen what happened. But she wasn't ready to deal with any of it yet. She just needed a moment to breathe, to let the adrenaline fade, to figure out how she felt about everything. What she did know was that she had done the right thing by walking away. She had stood up for herself. She had called out the behavior for what it was, and she had refused to participate in something that was designed to tear her down. That took strength. And even though she felt shaken and hurt, she also felt proud of herself for not backing down. The View had been the scene of many heated debates and arguments over the years, but nothing quite like this. This wasn't a political disagreement or a difference of opinion on social issues. This was a host personally attacking a guest in a way that felt cruel and calculated. The audience had seen it happen in real time, and they weren't going to forget it. Joy sat at the table after the show ended, alone now that everyone else had left quickly. The studio was being cleaned up around her. She stared at her notes, at the questions she had planned to ask about Sandra's movie, her charity work, the funny stories she had prepared. Somewhere along the way, she had abandoned all of that and gone after Sandra personally. The producers were going to have a lot to say about this. The network was going to have a lot to say about this. America was going to have a lot to say about this. But all of that would come later. Right now, in this moment, Sandra Bullock was driving through the city, having walked off The View with her head held high, refusing to be diminished by someone who had tried to break her down on live television. She had faced the attack, she had defended herself, and she had left on her own terms. The confrontation was over, but the impact of what had happened would echo for a long time to come. The footage would be replayed endlessly. People would analyze every word, every expression, every moment of the confrontation. They would debate who was right and who was wrong, though most would agree that Joy had crossed a serious line. Media outlets would cover it extensively. Other celebrities would weigh in, many of them sharing their own stories of being ambushed or mistreated during interviews. But in the end, what mattered most was that Sandra had stood her ground. She had shown that being kind and being strong weren't mutually exclusive. She had shown that walking away from toxicity wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She had shown that no amount of fame or success meant you had to accept being treated poorly. The car continued through the city streets, taking Sandra away from the chaos, away from the confrontation, away from the studio, where she had just experienced one of the most difficult moments of her public life. She would heal from this. She would move forward. She would continue making great films and doing important work and living her life with dignity. And Joy Behar would have to reckon with what she had done, with the choice she had made to attack instead of interview, to tear down instead of engage. The View would have to address it. The network would have to respond. The consequences were just beginning. But Sandra Bullock was done. She had said her piece, she had defended herself, and she had walked away. The confrontation had ended the only way it could have. with Sandra refusing to participate any longer in something that had become toxic and cruel. She was gone, the interview was over, and nothing would ever be the same.